Looking back now, I realize that I should have dated my wife for a much longer period before getting married. We tied the knot after only 1 year of dating, and although we were happy for a while, things eventually started to fall apart. 3 years into our marriage, I decided to surprise my wife at her workplace with flowers and takeout from her favorite restaurant. It was my first time visiting her at work, so none of her colleagues knew what I looked like. When I introduced myself to the receptionist, Kelly, she was stunned and speechless. I waited for Kelly's response, but it took her a while to reply, and I started to wonder if I had something on my face. Eventually, she informed me that my wife had already left for lunch, but would be back shortly. I decided to sit in the lobby near the building entrance and wait. While I was waiting, I noticed that Kelly was texting furiously on her phone. Several women walked by and glanced at me, some even stopping to whisper to Kelly. Perhaps they were envious that I was bringing my wife flowers and good food. At first, I felt like a good husband for bringing my wife flowers and food. However, my confidence quickly turned into shock as I watched my wife stroll through the entrance hand in hand with another man. As soon as she saw me, she let go of his hand and distanced herself from him. Her face was filled with distress as she quickly approached me. I slowly stood up, feeling bewildered as I looked around at the 5 women and 1 man who were staring at us. It was Kelly who broke the silence by asking, "So, you're her husband?" My wife covered her mouth, too upset to speak. My wife was starting to realize the gravity of the situation. When Kelly asked if I was her husband, I confirmed that I was, causing the other man to walk out of the building. My wife followed him, and I tried to follow her. But Kelly and some other women stopped me. They revealed that my wife had introduced the man as her fiancé 8 months ago, which was alarming news to me. I gave Kelly the lunch and flowers along with my phone number and left the building to search for my cheating wife. When I found her, she was telling the man that she would leave me for him and assuring him of her strong feelings. I interrupted and told them that it wouldn't be necessary, effectively ending our marriage. After discovering my wife's infidelity, I decided to file for divorce and planned to put all her belongings outside for her and her lover to collect. My wife was horrified and pleaded with me not to leave her belongings outside, as they were high-quality branded items that she didn't want to get dirty or damaged. I was speechless at her lack of consideration towards me, and I began to question how I ever thought everything was okay between us. Without another word, I got into my car and left her standing with the man in the parking lot. If she didn't hurry to collect her things, they would likely be ruined. Upon arriving home, I immediately started throwing her possessions out of the second-story window. I immediately called my mom for support, and she rushed over as quickly as possible. Together, we began tossing my wife's belongings out of the window. My mom offered words of comfort, assuring me that this wasn't the end, but rather the beginning of a new and exciting chapter in my life. She had a way with words that always made me feel better. The next day, my wife showed up at the house with her not-so-secret lover in tow. He had arrived in a pickup truck, and it was clear that my wife had far too many possessions to fit in it. I could see the worry in his eyes, and it was evident that he had underestimated just how much stuff my wife had accumulated. Until this point, he had likely believed that my wife was a simple, single woman without an excessive amount of possessions. As they began loading up the man's truck, it became apparent that my wife came with a significant amount of baggage. She quit after breaking a nail and watched as he worked to load up the truck. My mom and I tried to focus on cleaning up the inside of the house. Since I had already changed the locks, my wife was unable to get into the house with her key, and she became angry. In an act of revenge, she damaged my front porch. However, little did she know, my Ring camera captured her actions. I filed for divorce shortly after this incident and turned the camera footage over to the police. The joke was on her in the end. She faced charges of disorderly conduct, which quickly came to the attention of her employers. They were greatly disappointed and decided to terminate her employment, as they did not want someone with such behavior to represent their company. A week after losing her job, her significant other ended their relationship. It seems he took some time to realize that she was not worth staying with. She called me in tears while he was throwing her belongings out, expressing that she had nowhere to go and did not know what to do. When she reached out to me in tears, I responded that her situation was not my concern and suggested that she sleep in her car. Despite her affair, I was relieved that it did not affect me too much, and I focused on moving forward and seeking the support and help I needed to get through it. Upon hearing about your wife's behavior, my reaction was one of shock and disappointment. It was incredibly inconsiderate and egotistical of her to continue an affair behind your back for such a long time, even going as far as introducing him to her coworkers as her fiancé. It was clear that she was prepared to leave you for him, but she should have known that it would not turn out as great as she expected. For a relationship to thrive, trust and communication are essential components. However, in this case, it appears that your wife lacked both with you and her affair partner. It is somewhat fitting that she ended up camping in the woods, although karma could have made more sense. Her materialistic and shallow behavior ultimately led her to a place of discomfort and hardship. I wish you all the best in your future endeavors, Op. Moving on to the second story of the day, your 30-year-old wife informed you, at 32, that she had to embark on a business trip 5 hours away, which included an overnight stay. She'd never had to do this before, but she was only at this job for 9 months at the time. She told me they were so pleased with her work that they chose her to be the one to go. She would be paid to do this, and it was like a nice little getaway. Since I didn't express my enthusiasm, she added that she needed time alone to do some soul searching. That was an odd comment. I asked for how she expected to do any soul searching while on a 2-day business trip. She just rolled her eyes and said I was being too technical. As my wife prepared to leave, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease when she mentioned needing an extended period of time alone in a town far away. It seemed out of character for her, as she typically disliked being by herself. I confided in a friend about my concerns, and he suggested we follow her. When I asked my wife for her hotel room number, she initially hesitated and provided a flimsy excuse. However, I assured her it was solely for safety reasons, as I didn't want to drive for 5 hours just to see her for one night. The situation struck me as humorous. Although my friend was convinced that we would find my wife in bed with someone, I was hesitant to believe such a thing about her. It didn't seem like something she would do, or would it? We arrived at the hotel around 10 p.m., well after my wife had checked in, worked, and settled in for the night. She sent me a good night text, which was out of the ordinary, as my wife typically stayed up late. As we stood in front of her room door, having taken the elevator up, I couldn't help but feel a sense of apprehension. Our plan was to barge into the room if someone other than my wife opened the door. We needed to prove that she was in there with someone before the door could be shut on us. I wouldn't have been so assertive if it weren't for my friend's encouragement to uncover the truth. As we approached the door, I could hear moaning, but I tried to convince myself that it was coming from another room. However, when a man opened the door, we charged in. As we recorded the scene on our phones, we discovered my wife lying naked on the bed, desperately trying to loosen the tucked-in bedding to cover herself. When her attempts failed, she quickly jumped off the bed and crouched down low. "For Christ's sake," she screamed. "I thought you were going to call me on the hotel room phone, not show up here." I was at a loss for words, in utter disbelief. On the other hand, my friend had plenty to say. He had known my wife through me for the past 4 years and felt entitled to let her know how sleazy and worthless she was for cheating on me. My friend aimed his camera at the guy, causing him to cover his face and quickly gather his belongings before fleeing down the hallway. It was apparent that he wasn't supposed to be there and couldn't risk being caught. My wife began to cry and attempted to call after him, but soon realized it was futile. He didn't want to stay with her or defend her. She sat naked on the floor in the corner of the hotel room, crying with her knees pulled up to her chest, all while being filmed. All I could think was that she had brought this upon herself. As I recorded the scene, I confronted her, demanding to know who the guy was and what she had been thinking. When I confronted my wife, she refused to provide any information and simply asked me to leave. My friend stepped in on my behalf and demanded answers from her, insisting that it was the least she could do to alleviate some of the pain she had caused me. Despite her tears, she claimed that she didn't know what we wanted her to say. At that point, I realized that there was nothing she could say or do to make the situation any better. I told my friend that we needed to leave. As we headed out, I informed my wife that she was not welcome to return home. She let out a loud scream of frustration, but I was resolute in my decision. The ride home was silent and somber. After the incident, my friend expressed his remorse for what I was going through. However, I reminded him that I wouldn't have known about my wife's infidelity if it wasn't for him. To help me cope with the situation, he stayed with me at my house for a few weeks while I filed for divorce and packed up all of my wife's belongings in the garage. I installed a camera in the garage, so I didn't mind giving my wife the code to retrieve her things. One day, she arrived alone with a small moving truck to collect her belongings. As she was packing up, she appeared to be alone and didn't have anyone else with her. I installed a camera without her knowledge and caught her loading some of my expensive belongings into her moving truck, presumably to sell them. When I called her and confronted her about the theft, she feigned ignorance. I warned her to return the stolen items or face the consequences. 3 days later, I found my belongings sitting on the porch. Weeks later, she called me in the middle of the night, sobbing with remorse. She expressed her longing for me and the life we had created together. Additionally, she revealed that she was pregnant. However, I was certain that I was not the father because we had not been intimate for 2.5 months. She was currently sleeping on the floor of her sister's apartments since her parents did not allow her to live with them. I informed her that she had made a grave mistake that affected both of us, and that there was no way to rectify the situation. I made it clear that I would not provide any support to her or the child born out of the affair, and that her only choice was to move forward and make better choices in the future. She offered one final apology before ending the call, and we have not spoken since. As far as I know, she is still residing with her sister. In the meantime, I embarked on a business venture and hobby with my friend, which has gained significant momentum. I am passionate about it, and it generates income, which brings me a great deal of satisfaction. Recently, my ex's sister requested financial assistance from me, citing that it was my responsibility to help with their rent and baby expenses, as my ex's situation had fallen on her shoulders. I found the request amusing and declined to provide any funds. It appears that my ex has yet to return to work. Although I sympathize with the challenging times we are currently facing, I am not willing to provide financial support to my deceitful and unfaithful ex-wife. It was extremely traumatic for you, OP, to have to endure the experience of driving all that way and finding your wife with another man. It is heartbreaking that she did not consider the repercussions of her actions, or perhaps she believed she could be clever enough to get away with it. How could anyone engage in online infidelity with their spouse for an extended period of time without experiencing guilt and remorse? In any relationship, the ultimate goals should be selflessness and honor. It is important to prioritize your partner's needs and desires over your own in a relationship, even if they do not reciprocate the same treatment. It is not beneficial to become bitter or resentful towards them. I believe that you made the correct decision in divorcing your ex-wife, and you are not obligated to provide support for her. Instead, focus on beginning the healing process and searching for a mature and loyal partner who will respect you. I wish you the best of luck, OP. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Take care.